Hi, I'm Tyler, and this is the Fox Valley Film Critics. In this episode of the show, we're going to be discussing the next in the lineup of the AFI's Top 100 American Films, The Treasure of the Sierra Madre, as well as the newest action thriller, Searching. Stay tuned. Hello and welcome to the show, brought to you by Groupthink Productions and FVTV. Joining us once again is regular host A.J.
Thank you for having me back. I'm glad to be here. Doing all right, doing all right.
I was not expecting you to come back this quickly, but I'm glad to have you.
Well, I couldn't wait.
You just barreled across the country out of desperation.
Absolutely. So. I mean, I heard we were doing another show, and I was just like, well, got to be here. That's a 13-hour drive that I need to make.
Did you drive or fly?
I drove. Yeah, 13 hours.
Oh, you poor soul.
Oh, it's fine. I got music. I'm very easily entertained.
Well, that's a good thing. I mean, so today we've got two good movies, and I don't know if there's a theme today, but I guess I'd say they're both
paranoia.
Sure, let's go with that.
Sure.
So you said you've seen Treasure of the Sierra Madre before we talked about this?
That's right. It was actually one of the first movies, like classic movies, I watched to start building my film education, my self-taught film education that I'm quite proud of. And it's one that's stuck with me. It was through a mire of 40s films, some of which still work, some of which do not. I think this is one that absolutely does still work.
So this is our second John Huston film so far. The first one we did was The Maltese Falcon, which is spectacular, if very wordy. And then this one...
Typical film noir.
Well, I wouldn't say... Well, yeah, that one is.
Yes.
But this is not a film noir.
No, sir.
It's more like it's almost an adventure story. I mean, you can see the Indiana Jones influence.
I'd almost call it a psychological thriller adventure.
I mean, I only say that because... You look at Humphrey Bogart, and he's basically wearing the Indiana Jones hat, and you can tell that Spielberg likes this movie.
Yeah, I'd say so. I mean, it was keeping in line with the kind of action adventure serials in the 40s, so it was a popular look.
This is like the No Country for Old Men of adventure serials. It's like we're gonna do a serious version of that version of things. So instead, we're gonna go off into the Mexico mountains and find gold. It's gonna be an adventure, except instead of being an adventure, it's a paranoid, horrific experience where most people die and everyone is greedy and everything gets worse and worse.
Then it is dark as all get out. It's shockingly dark for the time. I mean, few movies really captured the psyche of the paranoia that at the time so well, I think.
Now, that's the thing about dark movies in the 40s and 50s. Directors figured out they could do really dark material if everyone who did bad things got punished by the end of it.
Right. Well, and that was part of the code at the time.
The Hays Code.
And I should clarify, Hollywood movies, one of the darker Hollywood movies at the time.
Well,
Italy at the time with the neorealism movement.
Yeah,
definitely established a darker tone. Is a
darker film than this.
It's a bit of a tough watch. But it's worth it. It has its value. It's just definitely not, a popcorn movie.
Bicycle Thieves or this?
Either, really. I mean, it's not exactly one to watch before bed to feel good about yourself. Unless, never mind.
I guess the No Country for Old Men in comparison is apt.
I think that was very good. I never thought about that, but absolutely, it's very cynical, almost. I'm blanking on the word. Nihilistic.
I don't know if I would say most directors in Hollywood at the time would be nihilistic. I mean, I think that...
No, that's why this stands out.
Well, yeah. I mean, there's definitely a cynicism to this kind of style of 1950s direction. Like the John Hustons and the Billy Wilders. And a lot of it comes back to what we were talking about in the last episode with post-war cynicism,
sure,
and post-war worldliness, is that there was a sense that there needed to be a more mature kind of story. and what you see in this is an exploration of greed, an exploration of devolving friendships and devolving relationships as the lust for becoming wealthier grows. I mean, the movie sets it up really well because all these characters are bums at the very beginning of the movie. They some of them go try to work, they try to get some money, but it's not enough. Obviously, it doesn't get them that far.
Right.
And they have this opportunity to go out into the middle of the desert, fight bandits, get the giant gold stash that's hidden out in the middle of nowhere, come back and be rich. And
that's the plan.
That's the plan. It doesn't go well.
Of course not. Why would it? Actually, something I found out when researching this movie is the older man, Howard, I believe was his name, was played by John Huston's father, Walter Huston.
Interesting.
Yeah, I thought that was really interesting to know, and he gives a great performance. I believe he was nominated and even won Best Supporting Actor.
Okay, and John Huston is, of course, the lead actor in my most anticipated movie right now, Other Side of the Wind. So,
and also a supporting role in Chinatown.
Ooh, nice.
So he's
which we did discuss in this show.
He's done great work on both sides of the camera.
I always forget that John Huston's an actor. Like you think about a lot of these old-fashioned directors, and a lot of them. It wasn't like nowadays where a lot of them double as actors. Occasionally they did that, like Orson Welles and stuff like that. But usually it felt like a lot of old movies there was a little bit more regimentation.
True. Yeah, you had your stars, and then you had your dependable directors behind the camera to capture that, make them look good.
There were like 5 dependable directors in Hollywood, really. Then there were a lot of
in the golden age.
There were a lot of schlockmeisters getting sent out to the middle of the desert to shoot westerns on the cheap. So.
And then you had the dependable actors going out and doing westerns like these.
Yeah, and I thought this was an interesting role for Bogart. I mean, usually when you think of Bogart, you think of like he's like the hard drinking,
white suit wearing.
Yeah, he's Rick Blaine.
Yes, he kind of is.
It's almost like there's a very romantic image about him. Like he's like a symbol, even when he's playing bad characters, like in Maltese Falcon. Like you get the sense that this guy is supposed to be someone you look up to. He's got that like John Wayne-esque like charisma to him, where that's very rare nowadays, where someone is just a symbol of something just because of the way the camera looks at them, and just because of how much they're able to embody like a presence on screen. And seeing him here as a bum is like so not unnatural, but it's not something you'd see nowadays. Like nowadays, Tom Cruise will never act in a role that makes him look anything less than perfectly fit.
Sadly, we're probably not going to be ever seeing another Born on the 4th of July performance from him, unfortunately, because of the image like that. I'm okay with that. I'm okay with not another Magnolia.
We need more of every Paul Thomas Anderson film.
Most. But no, speaking of Bogart in this movie and Huston, I'm going to go out there and with my hot take and say that this is the best work of both of them. Not just a collaboration, but in their careers. I think this is Huston's best directed movie, and I think this is Bogart's best performance.
I'm forgetting everything that Huston's directed. So he did
Maltese Falcon, African Queen, Key Largo, this as well.
Did you make Sleep?
He did not. I believe that was Howard Hawks.
Okay. For some reason, him and Howard Hawks had the same space in my brain. So, but
interesting.
They directed a lot of the same kinds of movies.
True, very very noirish in the 40s
and westerns.
And then also Huston later in his career in 1982, I believe, directed Annie, the musical Annie.
Huh.
Which, watching his filmography, how could he not? That's the natural transition, right?
I guess he would go back to old Hollywood like late in his career, but that's still the weirdest thing I've heard today.
Yeah, but fine. And then Bogart. I mean, you have your Casablancas, your African Queen and Maltese Falcon. He's done work with Huston before, but I think he really captures desperation, and you see the greed on his face so clearly. You know, without saying anything, exactly what he's thinking, what he's desiring, and what he's willing to do to get it.
Again, that's why it's so weird to see Bogart in that role, because you think Bogart, romantic, and then, as I said, actors just nowadays don't do that sort of thing. Like they care about their image too much. Like, was Bogart just a B actor so much frequently that he could get away with doing more difficult roles or roles that weren't flattering to them necessarily?
Oh, I wouldn't say so at all. I'd say him, Cary Grant, Jimmy Stewart, they were leading Hollywood at the time. They were the A-list.
Well, because this would have been post Casablanca then, because prior to Casablanca he was a B actor, and then after that he kind of shot to the A-list.
Yeah, late 30s, I'd say he started to
Well,
really
it was
gain,
Casablanca.
gain
'cause
friction.
'cause-
Well, Maltese Falcon was before Casablanca.
but that wasn't as big.
Um,
Casablanca is like huge, like come out of nowhere huge.
but still, he was established as a leading actor.
Yeah, he just wouldn't have been A-list at that time. So
Perhaps not.
this would have been after?
Yeah, this was 1948, I believe.
Okay. So yeah,
So later 40s, those were both early 40s.
okay. I mean, I don't know what John Huston was doing during the war, so
Probably some sort of propaganda. I would gander if he was not a part of the armed forces, he was probably doing some government-sanctioned propaganda for America.
he might
That's
have been.
how a lot of directors.
Capra did that, Ford did that, but
Mhm.
I don't know about Houston. Well, this is something to look into
There's
later.
a great documentary series on Netflix. I believe it's called Five Came Back, something like that, about the major Hollywood directors who shot war footage and war propaganda, basically, for the American side.
Okay, that's all the time we have for this segment. You can join us for the following segment. We'll be discussing the newest action thriller, Searching. Stay tuned. Welcome back to this segment. Now we get to talk about Searching, which I did not see. I did not see the trailer going into this. I did not see anything. I just saw Facebook ads, and suddenly I heard that Searching was like the best film out recently, and I saw it, and I am inclined to agree.
Really? Okay, then this will be a good discussion.
Oh my gosh!
First of all, I thought you were going to say that you hadn't seen it yet. I was
Oh,
like,
no,
well,
no.
that kind of leaves me out on
This is a movie that's interesting to me because one of the things I've noticed booking episodes for this show is that you can't predict things long term. Like you can look at movie release calendars and be like, oh, okay, so there's a Disney movie this day, so there's a Predator movie this day, so there's a Marvel movie this day, and you can kind of sort of come up with a schedule going out months into the next year.
Sure.
Like I basically know all the movies that are coming out through May of next year through just keeping track of things.
Sure, and they're also constantly changing, you know, with rewrites and such, and sometimes Avengers Infinity War decides to come out a week earlier.
Yeah. And then something like this happens where something you don't expect at all pops up, and you don't have the ability to really comment on it. Like I remember The Quiet Place came out, and I it wasn't even on my radar. I saw it. It was probably the best film of April this year. We didn't talk about it on the show because I didn't realize that it was going to be a thing.
That's interesting. That's another movie that I have problems with, and I think is
I
more
mean,
highly reviewed than I think it should be.
It's also one of the only movies that came out in April of this year. So
yeah, I was trying to think of what came out.
Well,
what
I guess
else came out.
Avengers.
Avengers did, but that's
kind of May.
That's still a May movie.
Yeah.
That's always going to be a May movie in my heart.
Yeah. So with Searching, I didn't have prepared to see it. I wasn't aware of it, and all of a sudden I just saw people like one of the most creative movies of the year, one of the most interesting movies of the year, and I saw it, and I mostly really liked it. I have a couple nitpicks with it, but but I thought it was a really impressive exercise in working around limitations, working around a medium and trying to come up with a very specific story to tell.
They definitely used the decision to for explanation. What we're talking about is the entire film takes place. How would you describe it? Through computer screens, through
I would call it
through video.
This is Taken meets Unfriended. This is I must find my missing daughter, told through the lens of every single shot has to be on a computer screen.
Would that be called diegetic, or is that just in terms of sound?
I mean, you might be able to call it
Diegetic filmmaking.
Maybe.
Meaning the cameras are within the movie.
I don't know what the technical term for that would be for cameras. I would just call that a creative limitation. So
it's an interesting exercise.
A director saying, "I'm going to shoot an entire film from the perspective of the man's computer as he's researching what happened to his daughter."
And using webcams, so you see the actors' faces as well as it will cut to what they're doing on the computer or phone or what
Yeah.
have you.
And that's where the real creativity of the movie lies. It's not that the story is necessarily the most interesting story in the world. I think it's like, I mean, there's one point where they literally call out the movie as being a ripoff of Gone Girl, which is amusing. But there's like the strains of that taken. There's a lot of these kind of movies that there are elements of. But the way it's done is that the director clearly had to figure out a way to use only his like two or three computers, and then there's one scene that's like security cam footage.
Which I think, yes, as it is used very creatively, the director uses it quite well, really about as well as you can. However, because of the limitations he set for himself with this movie, I think he has to really stretch to make some things filmable.
There are only
Like you brought up, setting up those security cameras. Why? What reason does he have? They throw it in as like a half-hearted explanation to why this scene that has no reason to be filmed is being filmed.
There are two or three scenes in this film that felt there are two or three ideas that the film that felt contrived, like because it clearly a person
Only two or three, you say?
I mean, I thought it was mostly cohesive. Like if you watch something like Unfriended, that's like 1,000 times more contrived than this.
Sure.
This feels like a guy who's very tech savvy, who just uses his computer for everything. Now, I think in that sense it works. But there are times where it feels like he's using it for too much. Like for some reason his phone is linked through the laptop, and like a video, like a sine wave will show up in his computer whenever he's talking on the phone.
I just assumed that was an Apple thing as a non-Apple user.
But he was using it on his Windows XP computer.
That's true.
That was the weird thing. Like there are weird things like that. The mouse doesn't move incredibly fast.
Or realistically.
It's very deliberate. Like someone is like the director of the film is personally moving the mouse.
Sure.
Like you must focus on this. But I thought that the actual like really contrived stuff that was relatively marginal. There were only like maybe a couple moments where I was taken out by how like not functional like the logic behind it would have been, just because obviously a normal person wouldn't be this reliant on their computer in its totality. A person this reliant on their computer would not be using a Windows XP desktop in 2018.
I feel like that had a very distinct nostalgic factor, at least for myself personally.
I
grew up with that.
I love Windows XP, but this is the idea that this guy is so tech savvy he knows how to iChat through his desktop computer.
True.
He can't upgrade to Windows 10, which is interesting.
But it was almost a nice thing, a bit of like mild fan service to just even seeing the pinball game for Windows XP that comes with it. It was just like, oh, I played so much of that.
I would believe it more if this guy just was on a laptop for most of it, and well, he technically
he
was. He's on his daughter's laptop
for a lot of the time. He switches between kind of the older XP and then what he's using.
There are a lot of people nowadays that still have their Windows XP desktop sitting in the corner of the room who just use their laptop for 90% of their work. And then, like, oh, I need to print a paper. I'm just going to go over to my old XP and print it off that.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's not uncommon. Like, but nowadays, it's just weird that his personal hub computer is Windows XP. And I know this is not the point of the movie.
Yeah, like you said, these are nitpicks.
Yeah.
And for the most part, it is a taut, well-paced mystery, I think. However,
the beginning part's a little bit of a slog, but once it picks up,
the opening scene tried to go really up. Like
it's very up.
Pixar's up.
But I think the limitations might have hurt it slightly, or they didn't quite execute it the way it would have worked, because there's a lot of interesting stuff in the way they're executing it, and it's clearly setting up stuff for later in the film. But it doesn't quite have the emotional impact that it needs to kind of set it up. But the real interesting part is like once the mystery starts going and like just the way it drags on and what slowly reveals bits of information.
Mm-hmm. That has a lot of red herrings, and that's kind of something that served the plot. I think that because the solution or the mystery could have been solved in a number of different ways. They kind of led you to believe it was a bunch of different ways before they actually decided on one, which one of my biggest complaints is I felt the ending, I don't want to ruin it, but the kind of the ending after you find out what happened was very tacked on. I think the original script. This is my guess, is that the original script was meant to be a lot darker, and the studio wanted a happier ending, and so they went out and shot.
I mean, this is a movie about a person who doesn't maintain good communications with his daughter. Like that, the whole point of the movie is about rebuilding a communications between people. So I think I don't want to spoil what happens, but
Right.
I think having a happy ending serves the theme a little bit more because it lets you have the catharsis at the end of it, and it doesn't just turn it into a super dark, which I would not be offended by. I like dark movies, so that wouldn't be a problem for me. It can have a Treasure of the Sierra Madre ending.
Well,
But
and I'm also not opposed to a happy ending. Just the way they went about it, it felt like the last 5-10 minutes or so seemed to be quite a tonal shift in for the rest of the movie. I think it was going one place, and then they decided to kind of switch it up slightly at the end, and it made it work somewhat. But I still think that it was kind of an afterthought.
I definitely agree that the amount of film that's spent in just suspense makes the ending feel a little abrupt, but I appreciate that it gives you the relief at the end. Like if it had been the ultra dark ending that had been teased, that I think that would have been a little. It would have been a little bit. It would like I don't. It probably wouldn't be as enjoyable as a film.
Perhaps not, and
necessarily.
I think that's why in my estimation, the studio did interfere.
I don't know if they did. Like I'd want to
I,
see.
I have no proof of that. It's just my opinion,
I'll look
my
forward to
guess.
watching the director's commentary and seeing if they mention that.
It'll be
'Cause
interesting, yeah.
I don't. I think that the theme of the film is just using technology to reconnect, which is the whole point of using technology. Is this about someone who's communicating with someone through technology who has a distance relationship to them, who uses technology to rebuild that relationship. So having a happy ending kind of serves the theme, I think. Does that make sense?
Yes and no. I think I personally would say that the decision to film this movie the way they did, um, didn't. I feel like they could have done it without this choice to film it. I'm gonna stick with the word diegetically because I think it works. Um, I feel like they could have made a perfectly workable thriller in a more conventional sense without having to rely on that. So where you look at something like Soderbergh's Unsane earlier this year, and I think that theme fit more with filming on the iPhone like they did in that movie.
Yeah, I mean my only point on that would just be that the gimmick is the whole movie. So, but I think that works. So that's the important thing. That's all the time we have for this segment. Join us for the final segment where AJ will give us his movie recommendation for this week. Stay tuned. Hello, and welcome back to the final segment. We're going to hand things over to AJ now for this week's movie recommendation.
Well, in keeping with the theme of paranoia that I think we talked about in both of the movies, I tried very hard to think of a kind of lesser known movie that deals with paranoia, and I failed. I could not. So what I decided on is something, one of the few, this is Treasure of the Sierra Madre, one of the few Westerns that I would call it a Western that
Have horses in it.
that I really enjoy. So I decided to go with one of the other few Westerns that I really enjoyed. And I'm going to go very film nerd on you. And
Lay it on me.
it's a silent movie from
Uh-oh.
1926.
Is it The Iron Horse?
It is not. That's 24. But it is John Ford.
Oh my
Three
God.
Bad Men.
Oh wow.
It's not one of his well-known movies, but it's a movie that when I saw it blew me away with how emotionally invested I got in it. That's not something that usually happens. I've seen a couple dozen silent films, and I, for the most part, enjoy them. However, it's very rare that I get, like, Three Bad Men almost brought me to the verge of tears with the climax of it. And I did not expect that, and I was very impressed by it. Definitely an underseen John Ford movie that I think deserves more recommendation amongst his vast filmography.
You did. I watched directed by John Ford by Peter Bogdanovich,
Oh,
and he ends the film by saying he directed something like 140 films over the course of his life.
something like that. But he ain't directed for decades. But still, that's highly
He
prolific.
directed for 50 years, like
Right.
1920s to 1960s, like that. He had time.
But still, I mean, if you think about it, you look at, say, Spielberg or Scorsese. They've been working since the late '60s, early '70s, and they're still only in their maybe 40s in terms of films that they've made.
I mean, Scorsese's done like 36, I think. I counted the other day. Yeah, Spielberg did something like 50. So I'd have to double check, but they aren't half as high a number as John Ford is, and they're both in their 70s. So.
It was a very different time, I think, in the golden age, and
pump them out.
very much so. And the quality was varying degrees, but when they hit hard, and when they didn't, they're lost to history.
I mean, John Ford, he stayed consistently above average. Even his like second tier films like My Darling Clementine or I think it's Cherokee Autumn. Like even they're notable.
That.
They're notable.
But when you make that many movies, like if out of 140, you got like 20 all-time classics maybe, and that's impressive on its own. Then you got another maybe 30 lower tier, and that leaves you with what, 90 movies that are just kind of forgotten to history.
I don't think any of his films are necessarily forgotten if you're a film buff, but
maybe not. But that's certainly if you watch all 140 of them, you're only going to remember a certain amount.
Oh man, that sounds like a bit of an experience. I will say, in the realm of paranoia films, I would bring up The Thing.
I thought about that, but I like to go with something lesser known.
I mean, almost all of John Carpenter is underrated, so.
I think he's definitely becoming more. He's gotten more mainstream with this kind of 80s retro vibe that we're getting nowadays. John Carpenter has embodied that, and I think our generation has really embraced him.
Yeah, but he's still a cult thing, so it's not like he's huge. But that's all the time we have for this episode of the show. Thank you so much for watching. You can find past recordings of the show on the Groupthink Productions YouTube page. You can follow me on Twitter at @antisocialcriti. That's critic without the C at the end. And you can find more of my written reviews at Geeks Under Grace. I'm Tyler with the Fox Valley Film Critics. Have a wonderful day.
Hello? Great news. I found us an audition.
Morning, Gloria.
Wait, you got what? I found us a posting for an audition for this really cool sounding indie drama being made by this eccentric, outsider, artistic type.
You did? Where'd you find it?
Craigslist? Look, it'll be fine. I've done gigs like this before. We shoot a few weeks, you'll get a shot at a big role to show off to the casting guys, and I'll get the cash I need to stay in town for another month, okay?